Go live. Well, hey, good Tuesday to you guys. How is everyone today? Hope we're all well. It's good to see you. Good to be here. You know, it occurred to me when I woke up this morning and I had set up the videos that I had missed such a golden opportunity to use a bunch of Warren Zevon and Werewolves of London references, and I like Warren Zevon's music, so I think it's a missed chance, but so I apologize for that. Hey, IR. Adam Black. Good to see you. Good to see you. Anybody else who's out there and YouTube is lying to me about the metrics of not being there like they do. It's weird because sometimes I'll sit here and say, oh, I have one person or I have no people. I'll wait a little bit to start. And then like 7 people will say, I'm here. Well, I'm over here. So I've learned to ignore what YouTube has to say until such time as I can later look at the analytics. I almost said the Atlantics. The analytics. YouTube's analytics aren't on point, but they sure aren't accurate either. Hey, Chris. See, that's what I'm talking about. YouTube is like, you have 0 concurrent viewers, except you have 2 concurrent viewers. Now you have 1 concurrent viewer, and I got 3 people talking to me in the chat. So I got 3 people talking to me in the chat. Height. YouTube's over here saying one thing, and I don't even know what's going on. It's that IR, that's like my best Nick Saban impression, so you're gonna have to you're gonna have to like that or not. Maybe we can get Joey Molinaro on here, get him to do one. Did I tell you guys it was back in January? I got Joey Molinaro to wish me a happy birthday as Nick Saban. If you don't care about college football, I realize that might just go right past you. But Nick Saban is the extremely successful and very particular coach of the Alabama Crimson Tide football team. Just, if you're interested later, like if you're like, what is Bill going on about? Look up Nick Saban rants on YouTube. Just search for Nick Saban rants, and you'll get some great stuff. You thought I was saying, yeah, you know. I'll tell you what. Yeah, you know, if you take Hank Hill up 1 octave and speed up his speech, the rate by a little bit, yeah, you've pretty much got Nick Saban. Because if it's up to you, we're dead and gone, 6 feet under. Again, I can't do a great Nick Saban, but anyway, so it's good to see you all here. And anybody listening over on Facebook. I had to manually start Facebook. It wasn't auto starting. Usually it's like the opposite. Like I have to fight to get YouTube going to catch up with Facebook. So like if you exclusively watch on Facebook and you're wondering, why do I see Bill just like from this angle and he's furiously clicking stuff? It's because Facebook has decided, yeah, I know it's 2 minutes early, but I'm going to go ahead and start now. So you better click your connection button. And I'm like, or perhaps, anyway. God, there would be an episode of King of the Hill if they ever brought it back. Hank Hill meets Nick Saban. Well, Coach, you know, I have a lot of respect for you. I just wish you coach for the Longhorns. Thank you for sending us that there Steve Sarkisian. Oh my gosh. So anyway, how was everyone's Monday? I hope you made it through alive. And this is hilarious. I know I've got 5 people watching on YouTube, and YouTube's just lying about it. I'd say that YouTube was trying to discourage me from continuing on, but I discourage myself enough. I don't need YouTube's help. Anyway, let's go ahead and get on with it. Oh, one thing I did want to mention that I forgot to mention yesterday, and I felt terrible about this. And I know I always mention them, but they've done such a fantastic job for me. The guys over at Bards of Greyhawk, of course, that produced the wonderful Summer Mountains theme music that I'm still working on getting like an intro clip, channel trailer sort of thing put together with that piece of music. That's that's just phenomenal, and I like it a lot. So big shout out to those guys over at Bards of Greyhawk, Jeremy Barber and Rich Lopez. Thank you both so much. Check them out. I'll pop a link in here. Let's see. That's bardsofgreyhawk.herenow.com. You should definitely give their stuff a listen. It is AD&D themed music, and you literally cannot do any better than that. If you enjoy Advanced Dungeons and Dragons and a good classic rock sound, check those guys out. Bards of Greyhawk. Jeremy Barber, Rich Lopez, they made a beautiful, beautiful track for me. And I played it a bunch. And I will play it a bunch. But to get on to today's chit-chat, Damien updates us. Exalted session got canceled. DM wasn't feeling good, so I wound up playing PSO 2 Classic. Found it more entertaining than its sequel, New Genesis. I have never played the PSO games. I have not. I know that for a while, like, it was super niche, but it really just fascinated the hell out of me from a gaming standpoint, a tech standpoint, I should say, less than a gaming standpoint, was PSO on the Dreamcast. You had to have a mouse and a keyboard, which were sold by Sega for the Sega Dreamcast, and their internet connection dongle that went on the Dreamcast. I'm not sure if it was a dial-up modem or if it was some kind of broadband adapter. Given that this was in the very late 90s, very early 2000s, I'm guessing it was probably some kind of dial-up adapter. But yeah, you could play PSO, and for a lot of people, that was the preferred way to play PSO, was on the Dreamcast console using a modem and using a mouse and keyboard for controls and their modem adapter. So I always thought that was really cool. Yeah, I always thought that was like a super cool thing. So I got too busy yesterday to play any more Fallout 3, but I'm going to dip back into that today. Namely because all of the 40s and 30s and 40s jazz swing songs that once you get Galaxy News Radio or Galaxy Radio News, GNR, Galaxy News Radio working, it's way better than the Enclave propaganda station, which is in its way funny and kind of enjoyable to listen to. And the older I've gotten, the more I've got like, hold up a second, let's give this man a chance. Let's listen to what he has to say. Good way to describe PSO is sci-fi Diablo, through the lenses of the Phantasy Star mythos. I have that Dreamcast keyboard. Cool. I always like anything that can, just as a lark, even if you're not going to use it, turn a console into a general purpose computer. I know that way back, like I'm talking about like 1996 or so, and it seems very weird to think of 96 as way back. And it's like, oh yeah, you mean like 6 or 7 years ago? No, Bill, that's almost 30 years ago now. But back in the 90s, someone released a Minix, basically a micro. Yeah, and I know this is a misapplication of the term Minix if you're a computer geek. I know what Minix is, but it was like a micro Linux for the PlayStation. Like, you had to have a memory card in, and, you know, of course you had to have a little hacky thing to let you attach a keyboard, and you use the PlayStation mouse, but it was just a very tiny install of Linux that they got running on it. But I've never been able to find anything about it again. That sort of stuff fascinates me. So anything that lets you turn a console into a kind of computer, general purpose computing device, really fascinates me. And I think it goes back all the way back to the 1970s when I saw the Odyssey 2 from Magnavox, which is a very science fiction-y looking game console. I mean, consoles back then were sort of a futuristic looking thing anyway, but the Odyssey actually had a keyboard that you could type on. Now, it was a membrane keyboard, and it was a bad membrane keyboard, but you could... They did release a programming cartridge for it. You could write little, like, 5 and 6 line basic programs to learn BASIC. Atari released a basic programming cartridge for the 2600, and you needed to have 2 of their keypad controllers, the type of which came with the Star Raiders game. And then there was Spectravision, who were famous for releasing tons of peripherals for different consoles. They released a keyboard and a cartridge adapter that plugged into the cartridge port on the 2600 and gave you like 2 kilobytes of memory to play with, which back in the 1980s was a good starting amount. For the longest time, and people even prepaid for it, and they got in trouble with the federal government. Mattel had teased an Intellivision computer module, and they were like, yeah, this thing's not going to work. It's a buggy piece of shit. So they canceled it repeatedly, and finally the government stepped in and said, look, you've got a lot of people that paid you for this. You need to release it or else you're in trouble with us. So Mattel, to a limited number of customers, I don't think they ever put it on actual retail sale. They released the Intellivision computer module, but then they later went on to release the Aquarius and the Aquarius 2, which were standalone general purpose home computers that were terrible. But they used, like, if you knew your way around the Intellivision from a hardware standpoint, from a code standpoint, they were very, very similar. There was one other I was going to mention. Of course, there was Linux on PlayStation 2, which Sony got in trouble with because they released the Linux on PlayStation 2 kit, which was a mouse and a keyboard and a hard drive that you physically put inside a slot in the PlayStation. But then they stopped supporting it. Like, they removed support for it. and people were righteously unhappy that when they would install various updates for the PlayStation, they would remove the Linux capability. And that, once again, got the Federal Trade Commission calling. Oh, and the other one I was going to mention was, of course, the infamous... so the ColecoVision was a world-beating console when it was released. Coleco had some, in a few cases, had some damn near arcade-perfect conversions for the ColecoVision. And they had I think they were called Pro modules. Like, one of the Pro modules was an Atari 2600. Like, you plugged this box onto your Coleco console and could just pop Atari 2600 carts in and play them. And what they had done was they had clean room implemented an Atari 2600 hardware emulator that lived inside this box, and when you plugged it into the ColecoVision, it lobotomized the ColecoVision and only used its audio and video outputs and its controller inputs. So you could then play Atari 2600 games on your ColecoVision. So if you had a Coleco and you bought it for $300 and then you shelled out the, $149 for the Atari Pro module, bang, you had the entire library of Atari 2600 games. But one of the modules they advertised was, it's like Pro Module 3 or something like that, was the computer module, which they did release. They did release a computer module for the ColecoVision, but hot on its heels, they released a standalone computer called the Atom. Now, if you're not a Gen X neckbeard like me, you might not know squat about the Atom other than it's an obscure computer. It was an infamously bad computer that effectively sank Coleco as a company. They produced more than they had customers to buy. The power supply in the thing was such... The primary method of loading programs on it was a dual built-in high-speed tape pack system. And your operating system, for lack of a better term, was a basic program monitor. That is, you'd put it in and you'd load the computer and then it would read and then you could type programs in BASIC. However, the base model and the printer were all built in together. So if the printer died for some reason, you didn't have a computer. If the printer couldn't switch on, it wouldn't feed power to the computer. So if you put a program cartridge in, a program tape into the Atom, closed the door, and powered it on, when the printer powered on, it produced an electromagnetic pulse. I'm not kidding. That's not an exaggeration. That's the actual definition of it. And would erase any tapes in, on, or sitting next to the computer. So you'd put your BASIC in, you'd close the door, you'd press the power button, you'd hear a slight whine, and then your tape wouldn't work because it just got degaussed. And a lot of people found that out the hard way. So that was the end of that little experiment on Coleco's behalf. So, yeah, I am kind of interested in the history of that sort of thing. I've lost a lot of people on that. Sorry. We had an Atari 2600 when I was growing up, but I'll tell you what. TSR had an exclusivity deal with Mattel, and they released 2 Dungeons and Dragons games for the Intellivision. And that made me so jealous. I so wanted those. They were action RPGs on the Intellivision. Treasures of Terramin and Cloudy Mountain. I really wanted those. Now, they come in the... There's like an Intellivision... It's like a mini Intellivision that has a crap load of games on a ROM inside, and you can select... And you can still get them and play them. But they don't have they altered the ROMs so they don't say, TSR presents Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Cloudy Mountain or Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Treasure of Tarman, because that belongs to Hasbro now, basically. So you cannot play the unadulterated versions unless you track down a cartridge ROM and play it on an emulator on your PC. And the games aren't great shakes. I would have loved them when I was 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, but as an adult, I'm like, yeah, you can beat this game in about 15 minutes if you can muddle through the horrible user interface. So, anyway. Yes, retro computing is interesting, and it was like the Wild West. No rules. Hello, Ricky Maru. Adam says, I think I mentioned that. We had an Odyssey 2 when I was a kid, and it was a lot of fun. Hex programming and custom Casey Munchkin maps. Casey Munchkin being the Pac-Man killer for the Odyssey 2. Anyway, so last night we played some AD&D, and that was a lot of fun. Shelby's new character was introduced, and I think she's taken a lot of the how-to AD&Ds to heart, or at least she's gone through the player's handbook, because she is playing a fighter magic user thief, which, let me tell you guys, from a player's perspective or DM's perspective, that is not a bad combo for bringing in folks from other editions, because it gives them a raft of abilities, and it kind of removes the level cap issue. So, she's playing half-elf. But here's a little best practice stuff from your friendly neighborhood dungeon master, me. If somebody comes in and they look at AD&D and they're like, wow, this is kind of primitive, I feel like there's so much stuff I want to do, recommend to them that they start at least, if you're not going to start them with a fighter, which is the simplest and easiest thing to do, but they say, I really want something, I really want to feel like, I want that same kind of feeling of utility that I get playing newer D&D, Pathfinder or 5th edition or whatever. Talk to them about playing either an elven or half-elven fighter magic user thief. If they go elf, they of course have the infravision, the 90% resistance to sleep and charm, the finding magic doors, all the extra languages, and a +1 with bow and sword. The magic user part, of course, they can sling spells all day long, regardless of what armor they're wearing or anything. And finally, the thief, unlimited leveling, and all the skills they get as a thief. It's a good enticement. So that's what Shelby's running, and she introduced her character to the party. And they went on to Castle Greyhawk and decided, well, there was some debate about whether or not they should go down to the 3rd level or stay on the 2nd level. They were unsure. They didn't know. So once they'd settled on what they were doing, they took the elevator, because I gave them an elevator. Because, and I'm going to tell you something. When we talked about prepping as a DM and prepping as a player and having a goal and wandering monster encounters can really, really lead to, we're never going to finish this quest. You go into the dungeon with the idea in mind, we're going down to the second level, we're going to wipe out that nest of trolls and take their treasure. So you enter the first level of the dungeon, because the only way to get to the second level is to the first level, ostensibly. Right off the bat, you run into, say, a wandering group of gnolls, or hobgoblins, or orcs, or an ogre or two. And they deplete the party somewhat. Party retreats, rests up, says, okay, let's go at it again. They go down. This time it's a swarm of 24 giant rats. And by the way, if you don't think 24 giant rats are a threat, you're not DMing properly. 24 giant rats is a bigger threat than a type 6 demon. And I've told that story before. Sometimes you got to ease off the random encounters, or you provide an alternate method that the players can find to get where they're going. Which is why I included the elevator, because exploring all of the uppermost level of Castle Greyhawk, and then going down, but going all the way to that staircase, I know where it's at, the players don't, it would go back to, hey, our resources are getting worn down before we can even get where we're going. So they took the elevator down. Doors open after they've listened to Girl from Ipanema a couple of times. Elevator music in my game is kind of a joke. It's turned into a bit of a tongue-in-cheek thing that they get on this elevator, and then I'll throw up a YouTube link to Stan Getz and Joe Gilberto's rendition of The Girl from Ipanema. Doors open. Dwarf says, I'll explore ahead. And as you see him take a step out, and then he just stops. He just stops mid-stride. So they spend 3 or 4 rounds. Meanwhile, I'm messaging the dwarf's player. You take 8 points from digestion. You take 6 points from digestion. You take 3 points from digestion. You take 5 points from digestion for every minute that the party is like, is it magical? Is it an illusion? Is there an invisible force out there? Hey, Chris. He had stepped into a gelatinous cube which was pressed up against the entrance to the elevator. It had detected something coming and slurped over there to find itself a meal. Finally, in attempting to throw a lasso to pull the dwarf back in, when they threw the rope, they heard it. I said, you hear it go splat, and it just stops midair and slowly sinks down. See, I had rolled that percentage chance for them to not be able to see a gelatinous cube, and they were surprised by it completely. So yes, the dwarf was being slowly digested, but eventually they blasted it with magic missiles and whatnot once they realized that, yeah, that's probably a gelatinous cube. And then healed the dwarf as best they could and continued on. But that was the highlight of the night. Grindel's character taking a step forward into a gelatinous cube, and nobody understands why he's just like stopped as the cube does its work. The other highlight of the night was after that, when they got everybody cleaned up, they told the party, hey, the dwarf and the half-elf that's currently adventuring with the party, that's Shelby's character, said, extinguish your light sources and we'll peer out into the darkness and see if we can see anything lurking out there. Now, I've always held that Castle Greyhawk itself is a malign and mischievous place. Hey, Rich, good to see you. Exactly, Damien. They did not poke ahead with a stick. So as soon as the lights were out and the dwarf and the half-elf were peering ahead in the darkness with their infravision, I threw up the image of the demon face from The Exorcist. You know, that cringing chalk white visage with the red eyes and the yellow bared teeth and so on. And I just threw it up for a second, then deleted it off the chat. And they were like, "Oh God, what was that?" And I said, "Well, both of you give me a save versus spells," which they made, so they didn't suffer fear effects from it. They're like, "What was that? I'm detecting evil. I'm going to check." You know, the Paladin in the party says is the Paladin of Ouijas, who has her own set of abilities because she's a Paladin of Ouijas. Rather than detect evil, she got to detect chaos. So they're scanning around, and I'm like, you know, the general chaos of the place. There's always a hint of that, but they. Yeah, I was like, yeah, no, you don't detect anything. And what they don't understand, and they listen to the live streams periodically, so I think the players get it, even if they can't necessarily role play stuff that they suspect or know, but the characters don't suspect or know. But yeah, the castle just fucks with them. It literally just likes to do malignant, nasty stuff to players. Etho, the magic user, chiseled trap into a wall next to a trap, and 5 minutes later suffered a slash across his chest, like felt agonizing pain and could tell he was bleeding, and he opened his tunic, and I said the word farts with an arrow pointing up directly at your face head area has been carved into your chest. I didn't have it do damage, but you know, that's Castle Greyhawk, all mean all the time. So Castle Greyhawk is the D&D precursor of Castlevania. I guess? I know the Castlevania games, and I know the cartoon that was on Netflix, which is actually quite good, what I watched of it. It's gory. It's extremely gory. But I suppose. So once they got the crap scared out of them, or once they freed the dwarf from the gelatinous cube, got the crap scared out of them, they went to this 4-way intersection that they had been to before. And I was like, okay, well, they knew that the 4-way intersection was just beyond a door, and the dwarf said, "Oh, I opened the door." Up to this point, every movement phase, for lack of a better term, the two thieves in the party had said, "We were checking for traps." They never said, "We checked the door to see if it's trapped." The dwarf just said, "I open it." I said, "Roll to open doors." Well, he's got a 18-something strength, so him opening a door is easy peasy. So I said, yeah, okay. You drag the door open, and there's this loud twang, and a sharpened tree trunk, not a bolt, not a ballista bolt, not a scorpion bolt, not a spear, not a javelin, certainly not a dart or an arrow, but a sharpened to a fine point tree trunk. I said it was about the diameter of a telephone pole, fires out of some mechanical contrivance from the space beyond and strikes the dwarf, and I rolled like 3d8 and did like 14 points of damage to him. So at that point they were like, all right, who didn't check for traps? They withdrew from the general area, and I was really curious to see if they would, just go into the hallway, because everything in the intersection of 3 other doors. Basically, it was 4 doors that opened onto a 10 by 10 space. And they opened the southernmost door looking in at 3 others. So they cast detect traps. And I said, the floor, the ceiling, and the other 3 doors are all trapped. Mechanically. So they fell back, and Etho, the party one of the magic users in the party, now they've got an embarrassment of magic users, cast Knock. It blew open the 3 doors. One of them, there was an electric spark. Another one fired darts. I can't remember what the other one did, but I said, spears fire up through the floor, through concealed holes in the floor, and then a huge stone block slams down out of the ceiling and then slides back up. I had everything, literally everything in that intersection was trapped, and I was seeing if they were going to walk into it, which they didn't. They cast Knock, and in casting Knock and forcing the doors open, it triggered all the traps. So if they'd stayed in there and opened, say, the right door would have caused the, like an electrical discharge. The door directly ahead of them would have caused the block to crush them, and the door to the left would have fired up the spears from the floor and darts out of the door itself. So it would have been bad. In doing that, the sound of all this nonsense and the doors flying open, with Etho being the one looking forward. Now, to activate a spell, and keep this in mind, Dungeon Masters, a spell that targets something specifically, even if it's an area effect that's going to affect more than one thing, you have to be able to see into the area where the spell is going. You can't, without looking, lean around a corner and just gesture and have your spell go, or even a wand. It won't work. I would say that Castle Greyhawk was the precursor to Singe's Castle from Dragon's Lair. If you guys remember the Dragon's Lair game, actually. So if we're going to talk about comparing Castle Greyhawk to video game castles, Singe's Castle in Dragon's Lair. There's your Castle Greyhawk. But yeah, so you have to be able to see it. So he casts Knock, watches all the traps go off, through the open doors, pour contingents of bugbears. They win initiative, but they don't hit him when he flees. 2 bugbears charged, didn't hit him, and he turned and fled. That was like his action after they had charged. And bugbears are big enough that, generally speaking, only 2 can fight abreast in a 10-foot wide corridor. So he fled back to the party. The bugbears came marching down the corridor, hooting and hollering. And they never got a hit in after. The party never took any damage from that point forward. Then the damage that was done because Etho saw the bugbears coming. Now, the corridor in question went to the northeast like this. Dan, the magic user, said, I'm going to cast Lightning Bolt up there, right at the bugbears. I said, okay. He cast Lightning Bolt. Well, this section of corridor was only like 40 feet long, and he was at a high enough level that the Lightning Bolt was going to go 90 feet. And he said, well, won't it hit and then bounce? I said, no. D&D Lightning Bolt physics don't work like that. So he killed a few bugbears and then badly injured a bunch of the party on the recoil from the lightning bolt. So that was funny. So your players are getting ready to cast lightning bolt. If it seems like they don't understand it, let them do it anyway. They'll learn. They'll learn. It's like, I'm going to cast Fireball. It's a 30 by 30 room. I'll cast Fireball right into it. Well, if the ceiling is 10 feet high, that's 33 10 by 10 by 10 squares that Fireball will expand to fill. And a 30 by 30 room is 9 of those. The Fireball's got to go somewhere else. And if there's no other hallways out except the one that the characters are looking up, guess what? So that's what happened last night during the game. Spellcasting got a bit more useful. They cast web behind the front rank of bugbears, trapped the rest of them. It was like that rapidly expanding foam that they used to create quick barriers with. And it trapped the bugbears. The ones in front were massacred in detail. And then Petra, the fighter, used her Ring of Free Action to just walk up and not get entangled and execute the remaining bugbears. And that's where we left off. So there was some funny stuff that happened. The lightning bolt, the dwarf just walking into the gelatinous cube, and of course the Captain Howdy demon face, Pazuzu, call it what you will, from The Exorcist, just flashing briefly in the faces of the people who are like, oh, we'll just stare into the darkness of Castle Greyhawk. So good times. Good times. One thing they didn't encounter, though, were lycanthropes. So let's talk a little bit about that. You might have a player or even players who, for whatever reason, decide that they're going to get their fursona on. Whoops. In AD&D. And you have my pity if that's the case. Let's take a quick look at the types of lycanthropes in AD&D. So we have werebears, their bears, wereboars, wererats, weretigers, and werewolves. With the exception of werebears and possibly weretigers, all of them are, well, and wereboars. Wereboars are neutral and weretigers are neutral. But wererats and werewolves are evil. Werebears are chaotic good, but, you know, chaotic good does not mean chaotic nice. But all of these creatures have one thing in common, and it is, of course, that they're diseased, and they can give you their disease, the magical disease of lycanthropy. Lycanthropes are humans with the ability to assume animal form. During the hours of darkness, they most commonly shape change to their animal form. In periods of a full moon, lycanthropes are 90% likely to be compelled to assume their alter shape. They usually move about as humans for whatever purposes they may have. Each type has its own language, which is spoken in addition to common. Any humanoid creature bitten by a lycanthrope for damage equal or greater than 50% of its total potential, but not actually killed and eaten, is infected by the disease of lycanthropy. If the person is carrying belladonna, there's a 25% chance that this will cure the affliction if eaten within 1 hour. Note that this infusion will incapacitate the person for 1 to 4 days, and there's a 1% chance of the poison in it killing the creature. Otherwise, a cure disease spell from a 12th level or higher patriarch must be placed upon the creature within 3 days, or it will become a lycanthrope in 7 to 14 days. There are some other forms of lycanthropes, but these are rare, very rare in the extreme. Wolf wares and jackal wares. A jackal were is a humanoid jackal that can change its shape into that of a human or a jackal. Wolf wares likewise are wolves. It does not specify if they can transmit their disease to people. I would say probably, but I would leave that up to individual DMs. So here we have wereboars, werebears, wereboars, wererats, weretigers, and werewolves. Now, again, you might have the player who comes to you and says, but my character really thinks he or she is a wolf. Werewolf would be cool. Well, that character, we're going to get into the specifics of it in the Dungeon Master's Guide in a minute. But best practices, I would tell them, look, first of all, it doesn't just say during a full moon in the monster manual, during the hours of darkness. So think about Ladyhawke. The sun goes down and Navarre turned into a wolf. But then that was a curse, but not this. But that's just basically the same thing that happens. So your character who's like, I'll be a werebear. I'll be a ranger werebear. It'll be great. Yeah, the ranger werebear is in the inn and loses track of time. And the sun goes down. And suddenly weapons are drawn because guess who just turned into a bear? Painfully and slowly. We've all seen An American Werewolf in London. That shit does not feel good. And in periods of a full moon, they're 90% likely to be compelled to assume their altar shape. So full moons are going to do it too. And in Greyhawk, there are 2 moons. So there's a possibility not just of once per day, per month. So there's all these types, and there's all the disadvantages, and there's very few chances of, a 25% chance if you eat belladonna. That's a 1 in 4. Oh, 44. Well, that didn't work. Did the character die? No. But they're not going to turn back unless they find a 12th level or higher patriarch casting Cure Disease on them. Now, I would say, and this kind of comes up sometimes, that a 12th level paladin and their ability to remove disease, I would say if you can find a 12th level paladin, you might let that work, but not necessarily so. Not necessarily so. But let's say you have a player who's like, cool, I'm going to turn into a wereboar. Let's take a look at what the Dungeon Master's Guide has to say about it. And we're over on page 22. Open your Dungeon Master's Guides to page 22. And we'll zoom in. A little bit bigger. We won't spend too long on it. There have been many different approaches to the disease of lycanthropy. Many are too complicated to understand or are structured so poorly that the were creature dominates the game. There's warning number 1. Lycanthropy as a form of player character should be discouraged in AD&D. This can be done by promoting the human attributes instead of the beasts, thus making lycanthropy undesirable as it should be. Some players may not realize that any damage over 50% of hit points sustained by bites in a fight with a lycanthrope may cause them to be afflicted by the disease. When this happens, it may be months after the first night of the change before the character begins to suspect that lycanthropy has taken hold of his or her being. After that first night, all that will be remembered is that the character was very ill and extremely tired. In the morning, the townspeople will quite possibly be combing the countryside looking for the rampaging lycanthrope. The player character may join in the search for the werebeast, not realizing that he or she is the lycanthrope. What if the werewolf was the friends we made all along? On the nights before the full moon, the lycanthrope will become withdrawn and a bit edgy, preferring his or her own company to that of others, including family. It may be the torn and shredded clothes he or she wakes up in, or the mud and scratches on the character's arms and legs that trigger the realization that he or she may be the werebeast the townspeople are searching for. If at all possible, the DM should try to moderate the campaign so that the players don't know for several months of game time that the character is now a lycanthrope. Any human player character. Now, it says humanoids, any humanoid in the Monster Manual, but the Dungeon Master's Guide basically supplants and clarifies anything from the Player's Handbook and Monster Manual. Around 6 nights, yeah. So, don't bash furries. Beorn in The Hobbit is not an AD&D type lycanthrope, even if it was a model for the werebear. That is correct. Beorn and his kin, as I think they're referred to once as skin changers. That's not what Tolkien was referring to. Although he does refer to were creatures at least once that I'm aware of, where Sam talks, or it's either Sam or Frodo talks about, facing the wereworms of the far desert. I don't know if that's supposed to be a legendary thing or if Tolkien was alluding to something he might approach later, but there we go. Yes, druids can take a beast form, and it is more efficient than lycanthropy. Let's see. If the player eats any belladonna after being bitten, there's a 25% chance the disease will not manifest itself, and thus the character will not be afflicted by it. If not, then a 12th level or higher patriarch must be found to administer a cure disease within 3 days after being bitten. If the adventurer is only able to find a patriarch of a high enough level after the initial 3 days, he or she may elect instead to have the high priest attempt to remove curse. The spell must be performed on the player character when he or she is in were form. The beast will need to make a monster saving throw against magic, and while in were form, the creature will fight violently to put as much distance as it can between it and the patriarch performing the spell. If all this fails, there's still hope. At this point, if the player wishes to remain a lycanthrope, the 2 charts given later should be consulted in handling them as a player character. If they decide to be cured and the methods thus mentioned are unsuccessful, they can take refuge in a holy or unholy place such as a monastery or an abbey. There the clerics can administer the afflicted one with holy unholy water laced with a goodly amount of wolf's mane and belladonna prepared by the spiritual methods of that particular religion. It's to be consumed by the victim twice a day from a silver chalice. No adventuring may be done. After a month or more, the player character should be cured and somewhat poorer in the purse, as this procedure is very costly. The clerics will charge for the cost of the herbs and the holy unholy water, as well as the services rendered. The DM may also wish to include the level of the priest as well as the adventurer into the cost. I would definitely do that, because to a 9th level adventurer, $25 or 25 gold pieces and then a sprig of belladonna twice daily for a month is not that much money potentially. So I would definitely include the level of the cleric administering it and the player's level. If the character has died in a fight with a lycanthrope and is resurrected, the disease will be 100% certain if the cleric raising the adventurer is unaware of the disease or fails to follow the proper procedure to eradicate it. The aforementioned cure will work on the wear-stricken creature. The cleric can use a cure disease if there's still time, or remove curse if there isn't, on the dead adventurer before employing the resurrection. If the cleric doesn't take the safety measures, then it will be necessary to wait till the adventurer becomes a lycanthrope to try remove curse or use the herbs and unholy water. If they opt to remain a lycanthrope, many things will need to be taken into consideration. The mental anguish caused by the act of changing, such as other things like conflicting alignments. Yeah, your paladin who's like, yeah, I'll be a werebear. Nope, you're going to be a fighter. And what his or her family or friends will do once they discover that their friend and loved one is the werebeast that might have been terrorizing the countryside on the nights of the full moon will have to be determined. For example, a lawful good paladin is bitten by a werewolf, which is a chaotic evil creature. He doesn't discover that he has the disease till it's too late. His mental torment is great, especially when the full moon is waxing full, up to the time it is full, and then for several days afterwards. The DM may wish to select a mental disorder from the section on insanity for the character to suffer from to reflect the effects of the anguish caused by the disease. The paladin, even after being cured, is no longer a paladin because he is no longer pure enough for that honored state. The DM can elect to have the gods send the paladin on a quest in order to restore him to his paladinhood, but it is not recommended. Brutal. No experience points can be gained while you're in lycanthrope. If the character is a fighter or lycanthrope, the fighter will be able to gain levels only as a fighter, never as a lycanthrope. This applies to all classes. The only way a lycanthrope will ever be able to control the change from man to beast is with time measured by full moons. There will be no control of the change into a werebeast for 2 years of game time, and it will be another year before any control will be gained for the change back into a human. It's 3 years. On the nights of a full moon, all lycanthropes with less than 3 years experience as a werebeast will change into their were form and remain that way from the rise of the moon till dawn, or moons in the case of Greyhawk. There's combat stress can do it here. Spells used in the vicinity, such as monster summoning, conjure animals, and animal summoning, might cause the were nature to be released. I'm going to summon a wolf. Right here, boss. What? They fight and do damage as described in the monster manual, regardless of how long the character has been a lycanthrope. The diseased adventurer will eventually acquire the alignment of the lycanthrope form if it isn't the same already within 2 to 12 months. While in were form, the character will not be interested in any of his or her belongings and will leave them where the change took place. This includes armor and weapons, except for were-rats who will carry swords. Werebears are the most powerful form. As with most lycanthropes, they will eventually flee to the woods. Once a werebear engages in combat with a creature of an evil alignment, it will fight until it or its opponent is dead. 75% of the time, if a monster with an evil alignment is encountered, the werebear will attack immediately. Wereboars are the most foul-tempered. Their temperament is such that they will not join a party unless they can be the leader. If they do join one and are not the leader, they will argue bitterly with anyone who disagrees with them. This action may cause them to change into their were form from stress involved in the argument. They kind of Hulk out on you, or pig out. Were-rats, of course, will live in cities. If a human is captured and not eaten immediately, it will probably be held for ransom. A were-rat will do all it can to keep the party it is with from discovering that it is a lycanthrope. Were-rats are the only lycanthropes that will carry a sword or use any kind of weapon while in animal form. When the marching order of a party is being decided, a were-rat will always volunteer to be in the rear. And then he explains were-tigers, they're only interested in what benefits them. They'll tolerate other cats to a certain extent and perhaps even have one for a companion. In human form, were-tigers can be mistaken for magic users if they have a domestic cat for an apparent familiar. For this reason, many in AD&D will disguise themselves as a magic user, possibly taking up the trade just enough to give the facade of appearance of realism. Were-Tigers might have no qualms about turning on their party if the party begins to behave in a manner that the Were-Tiger finds incompatible with its desires. And then we have a change table for the moons. And by the way, if they're wearing armor, and we're over on page 23. If they're wearing armor and they change, consult this table. It's going to hurt. So you have armor types from none, leather padded, studded leather, ringmail, scale mail, chainmail, split mail, bandit, and plate. And then the different body forms. Were-bear, were-rat, were-boar, were-tiger, and were-wolf. And then how much damage they'll take when they change into their respective form. I would guess with plate mail, even though were-rat becomes smaller, it still the straps and positions, compared to a hunched over rat-like form, and plates literally collapsing on the rat form. All of this will do minor damage, but it's nothing compared to the anguish and the troubles that the player who is bitten by a were creature will suffer. So if you've got a player, again, who's getting their furry on and they're like, hey, I'm a were-tiger, it's cool, man, I'm Tony, it's great. Yeah, the farmers are looking for who murdered 10 of their sheep last night, and there's a trail of bloody and muddy footprints that lead right up to the window of the room in the inn you're staying at. Not so cool now, is it? So I would follow the DM G on this and not allow were creatures to go creeping around. All jokes about werewolves of London aside, and my hair is perfect, and so on and etc. It's not a good scene, man. As a DM, you should absolutely have this happen, even if the party's aware and they're like, "Hey, no, this is cool. Bob's a werebear now, and everything's hunky dory." Okay, well, we're gonna go assault the Kobold Cave at night. Sorry, I can't. I'll be a bear tonight. Well, can you come with us? Nope, I'm going to go do bear things. I'm going to go shit in the woods. And that's just werebears. I think someone in the chat mentioned earlier, werebears might be might be drawn from Beorn in The Hobbit and the Beornings later on. Were-boars, as far as I'm aware, as far as I know, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the only place I can think of that were-boars show up actually is a guy named Fang Nailtooth from a character in Quag Keep, which is the first ever Dungeons and Dragons novel written. It was written by Andre Norton, and it is a trip. But that's the only were-boar that I'm conscious of. Were-rats all came scurrying out of Fritz Leiber's Fafhrd and Grey Mouser stories. Were-tigers, unless that's like a Far Eastern thing, I'm not really sure about. And of course, werewolves are classic, in case you were curious. So, there you have it, guys. Player characters that are like, ooh, I'm going to be a were creature. Be careful what you wish for. Be very careful what you wish for. And definitely use a DM. Make it a bad thing. Make it a very bad thing. Because even the good werebear, is going to fight till the thing is dead. The party might be, hey, we're not tough enough to take that hill giant. Bob, what are you doing? Bob. Bob's going over there trading blows with the thing. Or a fire giant. Or what have you. Something that is tougher and badder than the party, but Bob's going to fight it until he's dead. So some food for thought on lycanthropes. And just go through the comments real quick. 6 nights of a month of controller loss. Tolkien does mention werewolves in the Silmarillion. Thank you. Like I said, I knew in the Lord of the Rings there was a mention about wereworms. And worm in the context of Tolkien's books is not like, I was bitten by a nightcrawler, so now I'm compelled once a month to dig down in the soil and avoid the early bird. Worm in this context means dragon. So Tolkien intimated faintly the idea that there were were dragons, but again, it's a hobbit saying it. It could be a reference just to a legend or something like that. Sauron ruled the Isle of Werewolves. Thank you, Damien. Remus Lupin in the Harry Potter books is a reference point for some of the lycanthropy context. The ancient Roman author Pliny tells of a werewolf in one of his texts, and a lot of our modern ideas are based on the French tales of the loup-garou. Yes, all good points. So that is how I recommend you handle werewolves, werebears, wereboars, wererats, and so on in your party when a character gets bitten by one. It's not a death sentence, and indeed it can kind of be an interesting way, an interesting adventure thing. Now, something that Gary doesn't mention here, but I would think that potent high-level magic, there's always a chance, and we'll talk about divine intervention in another stream because we've gone on long for a while today. But there's always a chance for divine intervention. The character who's been turned into a werewolf says, "Look, I want to pray for my God to intervene." Well, okay. DM weighs the chances, rolls the percentile dice, oh look, there it is, an 01. Heronius sends an astral diva to ask what you need. Well, I need this cured. I would deem at that point that, under such extraordinary circumstances, the disease could be removed. Or alternately, limited wish, alter reality, or a full-on wish spell would do the trick. So I would add those to the sheaf of possible cures. But if you're looking for a classic fantasy story monster movie kind of fix for it, then right there. And again, if you have a player who becomes a were creature with all the commensurate abilities, it's like, I was only a 3rd level fighter, but now I'm a 7th level werebear. How cool is that? I have 7 hit dice. Just let it play out like it should. And don't let the were character run away with the game. All right? So that's about were. No pun intended. We're going to wrap up today. Tomorrow is Wednesday. Don't know if Kyle's going to be here. I'll post up the link to tomorrow's Wednesday night BS live stream. At that time, once I find out whether or not Kyle's going to be able to make it. I hope he can. We got our fingers crossed. And if he can't, then we'll hope for the next time. So, tomorrow night live stream. And then we'll go on Thursday and Friday. We'll just get right back on track. And we'll see what those days bring us. So you guys have an absolutely outstanding day. Thanks for stopping by and watching the live stream. And should the Paladin's immunity to disease prevent infection with lycanthropy? I feel like that was brought up in From the Sorcerer's Scroll or Out on a Limb. Basically, somebody asking that in Dragon Magazine for rules clarification, and the answer was no. But there's precedent for it in that the in Three Hearts and Three Lions, Holger the Dane deals with lycanthropy, and I won't spoil it, but I will say he doesn't become a werewolf. That is, I won't spoil the chapter of the book in the overall. He does not himself become a werewolf. So possibly, but if you treat it as strictly a magical disease, then no. But that's kind of up to you. So, there, then, I will depart for the day. Thanking you all for stopping by. We'll be back tomorrow night, and we'll have fun. It'll be Wastrel Wednesday, and we'll have a lot of fun. So you guys have an absolutely outstanding day. Thanks for swinging by, everybody. Go listen to Bards of Greyhawk, bardsofgreyhawk.hearnow.com, and enjoy their music. It's wonderful stuff. Love you guys. Thank you all for stopping by. Oh! Before I leave, a special shout out today. Anna Maya Young, the lady who is the mistress of Gods and Monsters, the genius behind the place. It is her birthday today. Happy birthday to you, Anna. You are a fantastic person, good friend, and all around swell lady. Happy birthday to you. So, peace, everybody. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye-bye.